Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Or. I'm a product manager at Kovrr, and today we'll be going over 3 of our 5 AI risk management suite models. So I'm sharing my screen now, and we can start looking at them. As we all know, generative AI is being adopted at a very rapid pace. And for a good reason, right? It offers great opportunities for companies, but with that speed comes a vast, often unmanaged risk. So many organizations deploying these tools without a structured, defensible approach to security and governance. So today we are going to lay out a roadmap. We'll discuss how to move from a reactive fear to a proactive structured lifecycle of AI risk management. We're talking about building a connected governance ecosystem. It all has to start somewhere, right? And in the AI risk management, the starting point is always the same, is the visibility. And as you can see right now, this is our AI visibility model that we'll go over in a minute or two. And the starting point is to acknowledge that you absolutely cannot manage what you can see, right? So the first major hurdle for the security and the GRC leaders is the explosion of what we call shadow AI, shadow GenAI. That's when our employees, with the best of their intentions, start using those publicly available tools for their work. So if we'll think about that, they're using ChatGPT, Claude, you name it. Some to analyze data, to write code, or to draft reports, all completely outside of the company, sometimes company's official tech stack. And often they're feeding sensitive corporate data into those models without oversight, no guardrails, and also no visibility for the security teams. And that becomes a massive blind spot. So the foundational step has to be discovery. This is where the dedicated model, the AI asset visibility that we'll go over now, becomes critical. The goal is to discover, is to map, and to inventory every single GenAI tool and the application that is used, right? Whether it's sanctioned by the IT or shadow tool, someone started, using yesterday. So it's about creating that single source of truth. And the mature visibility tool does more than just give you the list of the applications. It will show you who's using them, what data they're accessing, and how they're integrated into your workflows. And it turns that chaotic, fragmented landscape into a structured, searchable inventory. And without this step, everything else is somewhat guesswork. So you're trying to write policies for tools you don't even know exist. You're flying a little bit blind. But once you have this comprehensive inventory, you can move to the next logical step in the lifecycle. So here we're establishing our foundations, right? A complete inventory of the AI assets. We have the visibility, and later we'll see also how we go from there. So the AI visibility, as we said, the first thing here is to discover. We can discover assets in 2 ways. As you know, and some of you might do it already, right? You have the questionnaire. You have some kind of an asset addition workflow that it's manual, where somebody submits that for you through the platform or through today maybe a spreadsheet or a Google form, so you can do it here. And maybe you do it yourself, so you can add those assets here, right? By that, as we said, by this questionnaire, what is the type, what is the version, what is the deployment, and can also start looking at the risk assessment, the data and privacy attached to that asset, what relevant compliance even, and the technical aspects of it. The second step the second option, apologies, for discovering an asset is, of course, the automation. So to connect and integrate your tools that you have as in today, and you'll get that real-time synchronization, the updates, such as, for an example, we can start with Entry-ID or the Okta or your CyberArk, Zscaler for network. I'll show you in a minute. DLPs, another example, and GRCs and ASMs, right? Asset management platforms, and so on and so on and so on, and even your own API connectors if you really need. So what will happen is once we're setting up our discovery, we're creating that inventory, but we can also connect our network traffic logs to start identifying that shadow AI based on the logs of what's going on within your network. We can set up our rules to say, what do I want to, and how do I want to discover them and identify? And for these ones, of course, to receive, and once they are not shadow anymore, we can start seeing them in our inventory. Once we have an asset that is being discovered, let's use as an example something as GitHub Copilot. Let's start with the first one. So for each asset, we know what is the type, what is the use case being used for, who is the vendor, and within the company, we can decide who is the business owner and also who is the technical owner of this specific AI asset. We will receive automatically a risk score with specific vectors associated with that. By the way, look out for a dedicated webinar around that. We can see what are the controls that are relevant for each of those frameworks that we're using, and we'll talk a bit about frameworks in a second in our second model, the compliance readiness. So here's an example. We can look at Copilot GitHub and to see within NIST AI RMF if there are any controls that might be relevant for looking for this asset. And in our next webinar, we'll also discuss about our risk register. Within our risk register, we might have risks that are associated with a specific asset, right? So here we can see those risks that are relevant for this asset. That will allow us first to understand for each asset, whether it is sanctioned or shadow, what is the risk level based on the score, what regulation aspect is relevant for it, and who are the owners, whether it's a third party, as an example. And also, once we're connecting our integrations, we can start looking what is the usage, what is the magnitude of work around and using this AI tool within our platforms, by the way, live, right? So it depends on the setup that we'll do. Now, as we've said, now that we know, right, what we are using, what is sanctioned, what is shadow IT, who's using what, we need to figure out how well it's protected. And we are seeing a flood of new regulations and frameworks that are specifically for AI. We have the NIST AI RMF, the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. We have the ISO 42001, that is from 2023. We have different regulations that have started to come in place within the US, such as Colorado or the New York. And of course, we cannot forget the EU AI Act and more that are becoming in place and in force as we speak. So the list is growing every day, and it's on the news now, right? And each one of those frameworks and regulations come with its own set of expectations for the governance, for the transparency, and for the security and guardrails. Trying to assess the posture against all of them manually is super complicated, hard. And it's a tremendous work for all of the teams. So this component, the mature AI governance suite, is the compliance readiness. We can start doing it for manually and also automates this assessment process. It will provide you a list of questionnaires in different granularities and the workflows to help you evaluate your current safeguards within those major frameworks. And it's essentially a gap analysis engine. It will show us exactly where our controls are strong, and most importantly, where they might be a little bit weaker or not, doesn't even exist. It identifies the gap, and it can prepare us for the audits and to strengthen our governance before an issue even becomes a regulatory fine or a major operational risk. So the compliance here, compliance readiness also needs to resonate with the boardroom. And our CEOs and our board member might see a report that says, okay, we're 70% compliant with NIST AI RMF, right? And to understand the real world implications of that, it's really hard. They speak the language of finance. They want to know, okay, so what is the potential financial impact of that 30% gap? And I'll start showing you here as an example how this looks like. So we'll look at the manual process to start with. So such as an example, we can start a new assessment. And let's start with the NIST AI RMF. That's an easy one. And for the NIST AI RMF, we can answer in a category or subcategory level, or even questions that it's really, really in depth. We can have a 1 to 5 or 0 to 4, basically the 5 implementation steps, as we all know. We can answer in a single score or multidimensional. It's relevant for each one of the controls that we have, the frameworks. So let's start with the easiest one. So once I'm starting the assessment, in the manual process, what we can start doing is for each one of those subcategories, we can say where are we at this moment and where we want to be, right? That's a simple one. We can also say that this specific question might not be relevant for me. And that's okay, because if we'll speak later about the EU AI Act, there's, for an example, a distinguish between the deployer, right, and the provider of the AI asset. So we can classify it as inapplicable, and then it counts it out. We can, of course, add notes and attach documents, so it will be audit ready. And of course, to have the owner. Once we have an owner, they get an email, and of course, being asked to take the ownership around this control. Another option that we have is, for example, to do the EU AI Act. The EU AI Act, is a little bit more exhaustive. And what we can see here is a little bit more in depth. We can start looking at each one of those articles, not just whether it's inapplicable or as is applicable, the notes and the attachment, as we said, but we can even look a bit deeper into understanding, okay, is this article, right? As an example of just being the literacy around AI within the company. Does that exist? In what degree the literacy exists? Is it being documented? To what degree this is being documented? Is this actively enforced? To what degree it's enforced? And even coverage, meaning within my entire company and business, is it across all business units, across all departments? Or right now, I'm in somewhat, let's say 25% of it. And later, I can be even 100%. Once I have completed my assessment, and we'll do a NIST AI RMF to look at it because it's a little bit easier to start with, we'll receive our dashboard that helps us understand, okay, what is my controls implementation average level? How many of the targets I have defined do I have 100% of the definitions around my controls of where I want to be? What is the average gap between where I want to be and where I am at the moment. The traditional but very, very hopeful spider web, the spider chart, because this is an easy presentation also in the boardrooms. What is our heat map, where I'm better and where I'm worse? And what are my top ones of the gaps recognized by where I want to be and where I am at the moment? Of course, as we said, we can start with integrations and read all of this data automatically, as we've seen also in the AI asset visibility. Once we've identified, right, what are the assets that we have in place, that it's the preliminary, we said we can't protect what we don't know and we don't see. Second, we understand how well we are postured in protecting it in terms of the security and the governance around that. It brings us to our third and arguably the most powerful model, the quantification. This is where we translate the compliance gap and those technical risks and assets into a measurable business impact. The GenAI risk quantification takes the data, right, that asset inventory, and our posture from the compliance readiness assessments, and use it to model risk scenarios. It simulates what is the likelihood of a GenAI related incident happening, and what is the potential financial and operation losses that can be for your company next year. So we're transitioning, instead of being just red, yellow, and green score, you get a concrete number. You get a dollar value. You can start calculating metrics like the annual average loss that I'll explain in a minute for specific AI risks. This already, right, the conversation shifts from this control is missing to the absence of this control creates us a specific loss of risk, and also what can be the benefit of upgrading this control from where we are today to implementation. Everyone in the leadership now will pay very close attention. So the key message is that effective AI governance requires an holistic full lifecycle approach, okay? It's not just one tool or one policy. It's a connected ecosystem that gives you the visibility, that ensures you the compliance and quantify the risk into those business terms, that drives the prioritization actions. What I'll show you now is we'll do a little bit of walkthrough around the GenAI exposure and the financial quantification. And I'll start from the end. If someone were to come and tell you, next year, you're going to lose $20 million for an incident because of using ChatGPT, right? $20 million. You say it's quite bonkers to think that there's just one number. What happens behind the scene in Kovrr's platform is that we're simulating next year using Monte Carlo. We're simulating next year 25,000 times, meaning that in the back end, we have 25,000 copies of how next year is going to look. In most cases, by the way, next year is going to be okay. In some cases, it's going to be not that good. And a little bit of next year can be really bad. And each one of those potential next year, right, aspects can have no incidents to one incident to some incidents. Some might small, some might big. When we take all the 25,000 copies of next year and we average them, we know that for our company that's using OpenAI GPT-4 as an example, right, that has $50 million revenues, 500 employees in the tech industry in the United States, they have the potential average loss of incident because of ChatGPT next year around $6 million. We can also say that the worst case scenario, the worst year potential loss that can be what we call also tail event or 1 to 100 loss scenario is around the $85 million. That's the worst case scenario. We also know that there's 18% chance to suffer an incident of ChatGPT next year for this company. And we know that without no controls in place, right, those controls that we've estimated and in our compliance readiness, when there's no control, the inherent risk, right, the risk that comes from the world, from $6.2 million is 12. So see how effective your controls already are. And your worst case scenario without your controls is 180. So look at the effectiveness on the tail. Now, what's cool about averages, right? This is, by the way, the EP curve. So we can see for any type of loss, what is the probability attached to that. So in 60%, I can get $25 million on average. In the 60%, 90%, and so on and so on. Average is a really nice number to use in terms of mathematics, right? Because we can break it down and we can sum it up. So if we can think about, we have 6.2 million. Now, where does those 6.2 million comes from? So we all know the Mitra attack. So instead of Mitra attack, today we have Mitra Atlas, right, for AI risks. We know that 6.2 average loss for, as we said, ChatGPT for this company. 1.8 comes because of phishing and later exploiting a public-facing access and the AI supply chain. And now that we know what is the losses, we can also start looking, right, what are the recommended mitigations that has been received to that. Another option is to look at the event types. So in this case, the $6.2 million, starting mostly 3 million from them will be events that is data exfil. And that makes sense because our data goes in and goes out there, might. Later is the integrity of the model. Later is the availability of it. And I'll explain how we got those inputs also for that. And also wastage is in place. We can also look at from the perspective of the worst case scenario. So it's for you to decide what numbers are you using, and we recommend of using them both. And last, what am I paying for? What is those 6.2 mil, or what is this 85 composed of? So we've said it's a lot of the data exfil, but we can see that from the data exfil or from the model availability, we can see a lot of it is from the loss of income. And later is the settlements, and settlements will be a big one this time. And the interruption recovery expenses, if we'll need to put them in place, and the regulatory fines, depends on where do you operate, and the legal defenses, and so on and so on and so on. And of course, if we know how well we are postured in each one of those controls, we can also simulate what will happen if we'll take them to implementation. So the control of governance, as an example, will reduce the 6.2 million on average in another $300,000 on average if we'll fully implement that within the company. And that will reduce the risk of ChatGPT 4. And also from the tail, from the worst case year, it will reduce another 5 mil. That begs the question, how much does it cost to implement Govern 1 or Govern 2 or MAP 2, right? Now we can start speaking in those financial terms that the board really needs. And we can start estimating also our ROI against other projects. And this is just for one asset. So you can think about doing it for all of them. And then to start seeing, right, also what maybe we should use the most. The way it looks like is the following. It's really simple. Is who am I? How many employees? What industry I'm working? What are the regulations? Average annual revenue. What is the model that we're using? Does it has web access? Does it has a public-facing app? How many records do we have of data? PIIs, PCIs, PHIs, even custom ones, because you have your own data that it's important. And then we said from the business aspect, right? What is my tolerance for outage? How much my revenue is exposed and attached for it? It depends on this model to generate that. How much time it takes me to recover from an incident? You have that basically on your BIAs. And then for each one of those controls, and we can do it for the ISO, we can do it for the NIST AI RMF, we can do it even through the Mitre Atlas mitigations techniques if we're using. We can start saying, okay, this is where I'm fully implemented, I'm partially or not implemented at all. And of course, we can go even one way down to look at the modeling assumptions and let you also look underneath the hood and say, okay, Kovrr says that the base frequency for companies like me, maybe it's 20%, right? For suffering an incident. You want to alter that, you have other information, you want to customize a little bit your view of risk into our modeling, hey, go for it. You want to make some controls to weight a little bit more or less within the calibration, right? And later the impact of the model, we can do that as well. And this is the approach, right, of connecting, as we said, the assets to how well they are protected and where am I vulnerable, to quantifying the risk and understanding the financial impact also of the gaps towards prioritization, budgeting, and planning ahead, and making decisions for the financially quantified. So the generative AI, as we've discussed, because these are the three models that we have for today, is creating both the new opportunities for new risks, many of which those organizations are not yet equipped to manage. And our goal here at Kovrr is to build you the connected governance framework that supports secure, responsible, and scalable AI adoption. If that's okay, we'll jump here for questions. So let me see them now. Okay, so I have a few. Let's start. First question. What do I need in order to get started on the platform? Okay, so for these ones that we've looked today, really simplified version of it. Your SSO or your identity application list as the entry ID, as we said, for example. Oh, by the way, you can even upload, even easier, you can just upload the enterprise applications, the CSV format, and then get automatically the RISCO, even without integrations, such as the 30 days proxy logs sample, Zscaler, a short list of your AI tools that you're using internally, who's using them, what data they're access, how critical are they for you, vendor documentations that you already have. This is really simple. So even without integrations, you can start having that inventory, you'll get the controls, you'll get the score, and we can start from there. Second question. Is your product currently implemented at companies, and how did it fit into their AI governance program? That's a great question. So yeah, our product is already used in several organizations, and it fits actually naturally to their existing AI governance platform. Most teams, and this is the reason why we started with these three models, they begin with the visibility. They give them the clear, comprehensive map of how GenAI and other AI tools are being used across the business. And sometimes they struggle, right, to piece together that list their own. So this is where they start. And from there, then, of course, the compliance and quantification models, they build the foundation. We help them to assess, right, map and inventory the asset, as we said, later assess the posture, identify the gaps, and translate them into a number. These are the real fundamentals of the governance. Another question, nice question. Can you support internal frameworks for AI governance? Short answer is yes. Okay, guys. So AI governance frameworks, as we've said, gets out every day. And we also know that you have your internal committees internally, and companies also develop their own for many, many reasons. Sometimes it's just, even as an example, a joint framework that you've created that then covers a lot of the other frameworks, right? And you just map it one to another. So there's not a problem. We support any type of framework. We can upload that, and then basically you'll see it across all of the different models. We can do that. Okay, so I hope this webinar gave you some insights into the practical lifecycle approach to AI risk management through these available models, right? We've started the visibility of the AI usage, compliance readiness, and we've translated the risk into the measurable business impacts. Please, please, please join us also next time. We'll go over to other risk, over our next models. Also, you can feel free to contact me, or at Kovrr.com, LinkedIn, website, to learn more about the platform. And by the way, we have a really nice and cool AI advisory services. So open this on the web page and contact us. And just one last thing, holiday season. So Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and of course, Happy New Year's for everyone. I'll see you soon. Thank you for joining, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye, guys.